The government has been announcing big changes to the asylum system this week, but some of those changes are real substantive changes that are going to ruin a lot of people's lives, and some of them is just kind of a performance, that's sort of tweaking existing policy or re-announcing things that were already in place. So here's your guide to separating out what is actually meaningful here and what isn't. The first big and important change that actually is going to impact people's lives is the move away from a long-term stable status for refugees. So refugees are people who have been through the asylum system, we've assessed their claim, and we've decided they are in danger of persecution and they need to get protection in the UK. So they're allowed to stay. They used to be allowed to stay for 5 years, and that would be on a pathway towards settlement and permanent residence in the UK. And now we're only going to let them stay for a period of 30 months, and then we'll reassess their claim again, and then we'll reassess their claim again 30 months after that. And it might take up to 20 years to ever be able to put down roots and start to rebuild your life. So that's a really big change. It's going to make it so much more difficult for people who have escaped from persecution and have found protection in the UK to integrate into our communities. And it's going to cost us a huge amount more in the administration of those repeated reassessments of asylum claims. So it's stupid, it's bad, but it is a really big and fundamental change. The next change that has some impact is that the government is no longer going to issue study visas to people from 4 different countries. So that's Afghanistan, Cameroon, Myanmar, and Sudan. And we're not going to issue skilled worker visas to people from Afghanistan either. And the reasoning for that is that some people who came on student visas from those countries applied for asylum in the UK because they said it would be dangerous for them to return to their country. In the case of all of those countries, there are very good reasons why people might well be at risk of persecution. So this isn't the unprecedented move that the Home Secretary has said it is, because back in May of 2025, her predecessor, Yvette Cooper, also announced a crackdown on a bunch of different nationalities that she claimed were coming to the UK as students, but then were likely to seek asylum. So this isn't a brand new idea, and guess what? Even though that was done last year, we haven't seen a big impact on numbers in the asylum system. In fact, asylum seeker numbers are really steady. And likewise, with this plan, we're not going to see a big impact on numbers. The total for all 4 of those nationalities claiming asylum having come through student routes is about 3,000. So even if you wipe 3,000 people off of the total of people offered protection in the UK, you're really not making any fundamental difference. But those 3,000 people are absolutely screwed. And that will be women who are particularly impacted by this change in policy. So for example, if you're a woman from Afghanistan and you've escaped from persecution and you're not entitled to study in the Taliban-controlled country that you come from, one of the very small routes out of that situation of oppression might be to qualify. If you are really bright and you have the funds and you speak good enough English and you can get onto a course in the UK, you might be able to qualify to come to the UK and continue your studies and then get protection as a refugee. And that's brilliant. Your only other alternative is to take a small boat to try to reach us and an irregular journey. And that's incredibly dangerous, especially for women. So more men tend to take that route, and women will be the ones who are trying to make use of student visas. So this isn't a very big change in terms of numbers, and it definitely isn't an unprecedented approach, but it is something that's going to be incredibly harmful to some of the most vulnerable women in the world, who are also bright people who could be an asset to our universities. So once again, it's harmful, it's stupid, it's bad. What else is there? Oh yeah, the Home Secretary has announced that if you are able to support yourself, you won't be entitled to support within the asylum system. So you won't get accommodation, you won't get asylum support, which is like £9.98 a week to live off. That's already been the case for like decades. That came in 1999 when asylum seekers were first excluded from being able to access mainstream benefits. They have a destitution test to prove that if you do not receive accommodation and support from the state, that you would otherwise be on the street. That's been in place for decades. So that's no real change whatsoever. And she's also announced today the supposed change that after 12 months in the asylum system, a limited number of people might have access to work if they still haven't received a decision on their claim. Which is weird because that has been in place since at least October 2024. So it's just a re-announcement of existing policy. The problem with that policy is that 12 months is a ridiculously long amount of time to keep people waiting in limbo without the right to work in the asylum system, and that there are then serious restrictions on where you're able to work and how you're able to get permission to actually get into work even after you've waited those 12 months. So most people can't actually benefit from it. This is in stark contrast to the rest of the EU, where all over the EU, you are entitled to work if your claim has been pending for more than 6 months. And in a lot of countries, they actually make it easier. In Germany, they've just announced that they're going to facilitate access to work for all asylum seekers after just 3 months. Why? Because it makes sense to let asylum seekers work. That is what helps them integrate in the UK. Overall, a lot of this is just a theatre, and we really deserve a media that is better briefed, that is able to call the government out when it is just re-announcing tired, old, failed policies or making minor bureaucratic tweaks and calling it a massive, unprecedented overhaul. But also we just need a government that recognises that refugees will come to the UK, and helping them to integrate is in the best interests both of refugees and of our communities. And putting up barriers to integration, which is everything that they're doing this week, is all about making it much, much harder for refugees to settle in and become fully part of our communities. That doesn't do anyone any good.